to Rates and Barrels. It is Friday, February 27th. Derek VanRiper here today, continuing the team preview series with a lot of help from our beat writers. We have the Boston Red Sox, the Detroit Tigers, and the Minnesota Twins all on tap for today. Eno on his way to Arizona. I'm a few hours behind him, so by the time you hear this pod, we will both be enjoying 90-degree weather in the desert, building baseball teams, going to the Sabre Conference, doing the nerdy things we like to do this time of year. But to get started today, Jen McCaffrey is here. Jen covers the Red Sox for The Athletic. Jen, thank you so much for making some time.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the position player group, because this is a lot different than what we saw in Boston to begin last season. I was just looking back at where the playing time went last year, right? Jarren Duran, almost 700 plate appearances. Trevor Story was finally healthy. He got to 654. Beyond that, I mean, Ceddanne Rafaela was kind of like the next everyday guy, moving around a little bit while doing that. Bregman, when healthy, was an everyday guy, but Bregman's gone. Story's got a pretty rich injury history. And you've got this core of young players that didn't have the roles we expected them to have last year, who are all still in the fold, potentially on the brink of making an impact. So who do you think is actually in this lineup on an everyday basis in 2026 based on how things stand right now?
Yeah, it's a much different team than this time last year. Just like you said, obviously, Rafael Devers isn't here either. So the way that it's breaking down as of now in late February, like we were saying, first base, Wilson Contreras, he'll obviously see most of the reps there. They're still figuring out third base and second base, who's going to play where, but Caleb Durbin is someone that they traded for right at the start of spring training. So he's going to be a regular in one of those positions, come the start of the season. Marcelo Meyer is likely going to win the other between second and third. They haven't, again, labeled where those guys are going to play just yet. But Alex Cora is really kind of putting pressure on Meyer to win a spot there. So he's not saying that he's a shoo-in by any means, but it does seem like things are trending in that direction. I think he has a lot to prove this spring. Obviously, Trevor Story at shortstop last year, like you said, was his first full healthy year since 2021, his first full healthy year in Boston under this contract that he signed. So he's really hoping to kind of build upon that and show that he can put a second healthy year together. And then the outfield, there's four starting outfielders, pretty much. They're going to be rotating through. So Roman Anthony and Jarren Duran are going to be sharing time in left field and at designated hitter. And then Ceddanne Rafaela is going to be starting in center, and Wilyer Abreu in right. Cora said those guys are pretty much going to get like everyday reps at those spots. Obviously, they're going to need days off, and guys will rotate through. But that is the position player core for now. Carlos Narvaez will get the majority of catching, and Connor Wong will be the backup like last year. That's how it's panned out right now. Obviously, injuries crop up and things happen, but right now that's what they're looking at for now.
Yeah, that Durbin trade was interesting because I felt like that put a lot more pressure on the playing time situation for Christian Campbell, right? I know Campbell was going through a pretty big transformation with his swing over the course of the winter. How do you see him fitting in? Clearly more of a depth role initially, but like defensively, what's the best fit for him now? Because he's moved around a lot during his time in the organization.
Yeah, he started last spring. He obviously won that job out of spring training as sort of the second baseman with some outfield experience and outfield time. Did well for the first month, won Rookie of the Month for the American League, and then sort of just cratered when the league caught up to him and never came back. I wrote a piece the other day on The Athletic about just this offseason transformation he tried to make and rebuilding his swing. And basically, the Red Sox has said they really just want him to focus on getting that swing back and getting better offensively. And if he can do that, they'll figure out a way to get him playing time. Now, with the kind of focus on the offense, they've sort of peeled back the defensive versatility and have him only been working in the outfield. He's getting some individual reps here and there with the infielders coach just to kind of keep that going for the future. But right now, they have him working in the outfield. The Red Sox, all four of their starting outfielders are going to be in the World Baseball Classic, so he's going to get a lot of playing time out there in spring, and he's going to be able to show what he can do. But that being said, there is no natural spot for him. So do they find a bench role for him? I don't know if that's necessarily the most beneficial to him. And I think they would like him to get kind of more regular reps. So maybe it's that he starts in AAA in the outfield, and when an inevitable injury crops up, he's the first guy that comes up. But right now, yes, he's getting most of his work in the outfield, and they really just want him to kind of prove that he can put this new swing into action. He did a lot of video work studying Bregman and actually Vladdy Jr. And kind of lowering his hands. He used to have a really kind of high hand positioning, like up near his helmet, and he was getting beat too much on obviously the high velocity pitches. So he really has a lot to prove this spring, but right now doesn't have a natural fit on this roster.
Yeah, I think just for people that are thinking about him from like a fantasy perspective, probably someone you leave on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues, keeper dynasty leagues, just be patient. I mean, Opportunity will be there eventually. We mentioned the injury history for Trevor Story, and it doesn't take much it almost feels like he's the next extra guy that would come up.
Yep.
Like if AAA is not necessarily the long-term fit, it's just what they have to do to manage the roster initially. The other guy that's kind of forgotten about as a result of the Wilson Contreras addition is Tristan Casas. And I think I underestimated just how bad his injury was that he's coming back from. And some of the comments that Craig Breslow has made really have put his short-term future into question. So how do you see Casas sort of fitting into this group?
Yeah, it was a pretty massive injury. So ruptured, patellar tendon and kind of had to rebuild the whole knee in a way. And he's such a big guy, obviously in height, but just in weight, that putting so much pressure on that knee and torquing that knee, they really had to be intentional and careful with his recovery. So we've talked to him this spring. He's on track and kind of building up. He said that when, he had the surgery, that the doctors said 12 months is pretty much when guys come back from this or are ready to go. He had that surgery in early May. So I think that's why the Red Sox have been kind of hesitant to be like, he's going to be ready for opening day, because the plan is for him to start kind of getting into games during spring training. He hasn't just yet. His last hurdle is to start to do like all out sprints. He's been pretty much doing everything else, hitting and fielding and things like that. He hasn't done kind of the, like all out sprinting that, you're going to need to be able to do in games. So that's sort of the last hurdle in the next week or two, and then he'll probably start getting into games, but obviously he's going to need to build up game reps from having not played in a year. So I think the thought process is that he'll probably start the year in AAA and just continue to build up those reps and kind of get, more comfortable again in the box and with his swing and all that. There's certainly still a future here, and I think, they'll figure out a way once he's ready to kind of work him and Contreras in at first base and DH and figure that out. Obviously, they're going to have to figure out the outfield because they were DHing guys in the outfield too. So it's definitely going to be a little bit, there's not a lot of, positional certainty on the roster with all these guys that they have. We thought they were going to be trading one of these outfielders because of this, but they want to hold on to everybody. And I think they just know that, again, the injuries crop up and things don't always pan out the way they anticipate. So with Casas, I think he's shooting for kind of a May return. We'll see if that's, optimistic or if he just ends up kind of staying in AAA for a little bit. But I do think that he'll be back sometime in the first half, and they'll figure a way to kind of maneuver him in and out of the lineup alongside Contreras.
It's still surprising to me that Yoshida's there. I know it's a big contract, and eating most of it would be required if they were going to trade him away, but it's another guy that just doesn't fit with the rest of the roster. If you don't see him as someone that really plays in the outfield at all, if he's a DH only, then you have to look at his bat compared to the other guys you have that are overflowing from the outfield. And I think even there, I think he's an okay hitter, but I think he still isn't good enough to crack this lineup as it's built.
Yeah, 100%. So that's kind of another guy that, speaking about just not positional uncertainty and just moving all these guys around, if they're trying to rotate guys through the DH spot, where does that leave Yoshida? Because he's not really going to be playing in the outfield. They already have too many guys in the outfield. And like you said, most of their hitters are more productive than Yoshida's been. And obviously he's dealt with injuries with the shoulder surgery he had a year ago. But at the same time, his spot is a little bit squeezed. So it is surprising that they haven't figured out a way to trade him to a place where he's going to get more playing time, and they're just going to have to eat some money and get maybe a guy they take a chance on in return. That might still be on the horizon this spring. Obviously, that's something we're always monitoring just because of the situation that he's in. But right now, yeah, they're going to try to kind of mix and match these guys, off days and all that, just to get them playing time. But it's not a certainty for him by any means.
I get your thoughts just on the position player group as a whole. With all this change, are they in a better place than they were when last season began? I mean, we're talking about the problem of maybe not having enough spots for the regulars that they have. That's a good problem in terms of depth, but thinking about the value you've mentioned before that Alex Bregman brought immediately to the clubhouse, him not being there anymore, the absence of Devers, like when you put it all together, where are they at as a position player group? Better off than they were a year ago? About the same, but maybe with a different clubhouse vibe? Or are they actually a little bit worse in terms of the overall talent they've got assembled?
I do think that it's an interesting question because I do think it is sort of somewhere in that middle part. There's young guys with kind of a lot of upside here, right? There's a lot of potential. Meyer was a first rounder in 2020 to 2021. Durbin is kind of this, was third in National League Rookie of the Year voting last year and had a pretty solid rookie year. Story's like kind of got a lot to prove, and Contreras, I think, kind of it seems like he has a renewed approach here coming out of St. Louis and being in the Boston market. And then the outfield, I mean, Roman Anthony's sky's the limit, right? You'd really just got to scratch the surface last year with what he was able to do. So I think the potential is there. I think that there's just a lot of upside there, but if they can put it all together is kind of the thing. And like you said, losing Bregman and not having that big voice, where does that fall to? Story is going to take on some of that. Story said that, he's going to look to Duran a little bit to kind of take on more of a leadership role. Contreras too, but obviously he's a newer guy around this team. So it's an interesting question to think about of, there's so many guys that we haven't seen what they can do yet. And if they can do what we think they can, then it's definitely a better group. If they, take some adjusting to the league again, then this could get a little messy.
Yeah, I think I like what they're doing overall. I think when you look at Contreras, he's underrated as a hitter. He's done it in neutral and pitcher-friendly parks up to this point in his career. So as a righty in Fenway, he's a great fit there. I think he can come close to the production they got from Bregman last year. And I say that realizing Bregman was two different players last year. First half Bregman before he got hurt was like kind of almost a vintage version of him. And then the second half version was a guy that clearly wasn't 100%. But if you kind of just mush those two together, Contreras can at least play at a level like that. And then Roman Anthony, I mean, he could be a superstar. Like I think it was easy to see how loud those tools were upon arrival. With Meyer, you wrote about him for The Athletic on Friday morning. I was blown away that the speed has increased as much as it has, right? I mean, he was beating Trevor Story and Jarren Duran in foot races, and I was thinking about this from a team tendencies perspective. A lot of people have said, maybe there's not enough power in Boston. And my first pushback on that would be, there's a lot of young hitters that hit the ball hard. You just don't know how quickly that in-game power is going to show up. But the second part of it is, maybe there's the team that could be a lot more aggressive on the base pass. They have a lot of guys that control the zone well, but they're pretty athletic up and down that lineup.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that Cora talked about even last year. Obviously, Story, stole 31 bases without getting caught last year, which was ended up being a record. Didn't get caught until September. So he really kind of set the tone for the team. But Duran too, we kind of know the speed that he has, kind of, the hustle doubles, turning singles into doubles, kind of catching outfielders off guard. Rafael is sneaky quick. And so I think Marcelo, saw all that and wanted to level up his health game in general, coming off of the wrist surgery and just knowing that he's had a lot of injuries over the past, really since he was drafted and not being able to play a full season at all. And so he really doubled down on these workouts, but also, the speed workouts. He worked with an NFL combine coach to kind of just do some really intense speed work to try to get better on that aspect of the game. Obviously, he has to, hit to get on base, and that was something that, he had a little trouble with last year, but Pete Fatsi, the hitting coach, was just saying, I think it's going to come more with experience. He did tweak a little bit of his swing over the offseason as well, and kind of is working on just his pre-pitch setup and getting a little quicker to the ball, and a little bit. He felt like he was flying out too much out front, and just that ended up. I think he had like a 30% strikeout rate. So he's going to have to hone all that in before he kind of uses the speed on the base paths. But Cora kind of really preached the speed of the group last year and the aggressiveness on the base pass last year. So I think that very much could be something that they're going to lean into this year and kind of rely on without kind of having that true power hitter. And like you said, I do think the power is going to come from some places that people aren't expecting, or maybe just guys are going to just get more comfortable in the league and obviously use Fenway to their advantage. But I do think that they could be one of the, speedier teams in the league just because of the guys that they have.
Let's shift the focus over to the pitching. I mean, a rebuilt rotation. You add Ranger Suarez in free agency, a trade for Sonny Gray, a trade for Johan Oviedo. I think expectations for guys like Crochet and Ranger and Sonny Gray, like we had a pretty good sense of who they are. I think Suarez has spent plenty of time in a hitter-friendly environment, so I'm not really worried about him in Fenway. Maybe Sonny Gray gets a little more banged up in the AL East. We saw some struggles with the Yankees several years ago. But I think the interesting thing about this group is the back of the rotation. Brian Bayo should be the number 4. Pitched pretty well last year. I think he's got the extension, so they're going to let him do his thing. But that 5th spot seems like maybe more of an ongoing competition where if Oviedo maybe opened camp as the favorite, I'd be curious to know if he still is the favorite to begin the season in that role, or if you see Connolly Early, Peyton Tolley, or somebody else emerging to round out that group. Right
now, I see Oviedo as the guy that kind of has that spot. That's not to say that it's going to be like that in a month. I do think it's sort of his spot to lose at this point. I think that they'd like to start Early and Tolley in AAA just to give them a little bit more of a runway to kind of keep working and keep building up. They performed well at the end of last season when they kind of were thrust into those roles before they're ready and a little bit unexpectedly, and have both worked over the offseason really to kind of Tolley to kind of add some secondary to his electric fastball, and then and Early to just kind of keep refining he has a pretty deep pitch mix, so just kind of keep refining that. I think they'd love to not have to rely on both of those guys right away, but if they keep, performing well in camp and kind of keep pushing the envelope, then I don't think that they're not gonna, put them into the end of the rotation. I do think that there's a chance that can happen, and I think it's just going to see how they kind of plays out over the course of the next few weeks here. So Oviedo does have some minor league options, and so that obviously plays into it. The other factor here, and it's a little bit less of a factor now, but they also have Cutter Crawford and Patrick Sandoval. So Cutter Crawford is coming off of wrist and knee surgery that he missed all of last year, and then Sandoval had Tommy John that he's working his way back up from. Cutter is a little bit farther behind and hasn't even started live batting practice, so it seems like he's going to start the year on the IL. But Sandoval's been doing live batting practice and should start getting into a game soon. I don't know if that leaves him enough time to actually build up enough to be ready for the rotation, come opening day. But if he gets into games and he, gets up to 3 innings or so, Cora always likes to have a kind of a long man in the back of the bullpen. And so just to protect the rest of the starters. And so I do think that there's a chance that Sandoval starts the year as kind of a long man and maybe pushes for that rotation spot if Oviedo falters. So yes, all that to say is I think that 5th spot is up in the air. Again, I think it's Oviedo's to lose. Early and Tolley are in the mix. And Sandoval sort of, but more so probably a long man guy at this point.
It's funny that, Sandoval kind of forgotten because they signed him when he was hurt to that 2-year deal, knowing that they'd get something from him in 2026. But Oviedo having options is also pretty interesting. There's also the possibility that, if Oviedo struggles as a starter by the end of the year, maybe he's part of the leverage group in the bullpen. Like, the bullpen as a whole is kind of fascinating to me. I think they've got an interesting collection of arms. They brought back Chapman. He's clearly the closer. Collectively, just this whole unit. Last year, they were second in ERA for relievers, but they were 19th in K minus BB percentage, and that just doesn't align. Like the skills and the results didn't match. Sometimes there's some reasons you can get away with that. You get a little lucky on fly balls. You play great defense behind your pitchers. You can kind of move things around. Is this a league average bullpen, an above average bullpen, or a possibly elite one when you start thinking about the personnel they have and maybe some of the spillover of rotation candidates ultimately fortifying this group over the course of the season?
I don't necessarily think it's a bad bullpen, but I don't think it's going to be one of the best in the league. I think like it is somewhere in the middle. I think Chapman, makes that the back end of the bullpen elite. And I think there is a question, can he do what he did last year? Is he going to be able to repeat that? He obviously cut, is the lowest walk rate of his career, the sky high strikeouts. I think that probably his ERA was like 117 last year. So I think that kind of skews the team bullpen ERA. His KBB numbers were pretty crazy. So I do think that, you have no problem really worrying about the ninth. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be that good this year, but he looks good early in camp. So him aside, Whitlock, had a really good year last year after missing the previous year with internal brace procedure. And so you're expecting him to kind of have a similar year. But then it's just sort of a lot of questions. Justin Slayton and Greg Weissert and Zach Kelly have all done well at points, throughout the past few years for them, but they need those guys to stay healthy, and especially Kelly. Kelly's been inconsistent, and Slayton has missed a good amount of time just with injury. And then you've got a Rule 5 guy in Ryan Watson, so he has to make the roster if unless he gets sent back to the A's. He's looked good early in camp, but obviously you're not going to be putting all your eggs in one basket on him just because he's never pitched up here before. And then like you said, some of the long relief guys. Another guy that'll be in the mix is Giovanni Moran. He's a lefty that pitched for them a couple games at the end of last year, but they really liked the velocity. It really, again, is just the command that they have to kind of be a little focused on and maybe potentially worried about. He's really the only lefty in the bullpen outside of Chapman, unless they bring in a guy, like Sandoval, obviously as a long man. So it's not the strongest unit. They obviously have a pretty, strong rotation. But I wouldn't say, that it's lights out until you kind of get to the final innings. Those middle innings are going to be interesting, and obviously early in the year when starters aren't going super deep into games, they're going to be relying a lot on these middle guys. And can those guys step it up and, not cost them games? So I think that is going to be something we're going to have to watch, and maybe something we haven't talked enough about this year.
Yeah, I think the strength of the rotation could go a long way towards covering that flaw if that unit stays mostly healthy. But if they have a few starting pitcher injuries, those depth relievers will be tested even more here in 2026. Jen, last question before we let you go. Potere has a win total projection of 82.8 on this Red Sox team. Do you think that's too hot, too cold, or just right?
I think that's a little too cold. I think this team is going to be kind of in the high 80s, the 87, 88 kind of win range. They made the wild card last year. I think if the team that they made the wild card with last year, I think they are a better team than they were at this point last year. So, or at the end of the season last year. So I do think that the expectation is that they get back and do more this year. I think they're going to need to have more than 82 wins, obviously, to do that. So I do see them kind of, I think that is a little too cold. Again, it's all going to depend on injuries and guys performing up. They have a lot of young guys on this team, guys performing up to, the expectations. So obviously that all factors in. But I do think that they're, somewhere in that high 80s win total projection seems to be fair to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. 87, 88 seems about right with how they're built right now. And if they stay healthy, get some growth from some of those young guys, they can get up over 90 with relative ease. So it feels too cold to me as well. Jen, thank you so much again for joining us on the show today. We look forward to catching up with you again later on this season.
All right, sounds good. Thanks so much.
We continue on with our team preview series with the Detroit Tigers, and to do that, we bring in Cody Stavenhagen. Cody covers the Tigers for The Athletic. Cody, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Derek.
This Tigers team cracks me up because this is the second year in a row they've pretty much run it back with the exact same position player core. I mean, Gleyber Torres accepted the qualifying offer, so he's back again, and makes our job a little easier on the projection side because when you look at how they're likely to distribute playing time across this group, I think we could just look at last year and say that's probably the starting point at the very least, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been kind of a fascinating time to follow the Tigers because for about 98% of the offseason, I think the mood was not great among the fan base. It seemed like they were going to do nothing. And then right before spring training, they surprised everyone. They signed Framber Valdez and then Justin Verlander. We'll talk about that later. But you're right. They still made no additions, and I don't think they tried all that hard to add to the position playing core. That's kind of a source of debate or consternation. But I think the team's thinking was, look, the Tigers ranked 11th in run scoring last year. They had, I think, the third most plate appearances from hitters under 25. They have some more guys, Kevin McGonigal, Max Clark coming. They're really doubling down on this young core of position players. And I do think that comes with some risk. Anyone who watched the Tigers for the final 2 months of the season knows things can go wrong, even with a young group. We all know player development is not linear, so not all of these guys are automatically going to get better just because they are young. But I think the fact they didn't they didn't even try much on Alex Bregman the way they did a year ago, shows that like they believe in this mission. I also think it shows they think pitching is their best path to victory. They really don't want to get tied down with long-term contracts, aging hitters. They want to maintain some flexibility in how they're building this. They have a lot of faith in the next wave of guys. So here we are. The lineup is going to look very similar, and I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. I think the team thinks it can be even better than 11th in run scoring. I have at least some level of skepticism about that, but we'll see.
It's the swing and miss in particular that was the concern. I mean, I think if you were trying to define Scott Harris's mentality in roster construction from a hitting perspective, it's always been about controlling the zone, and that's why the swing and miss surprises me so much. And Kevin McGonigal could certainly help. That's one key difference from 26 to 25, and the timeline for him is probably the next question I should ask you, like, based on what you've seen so far. And I think I've asked you this question at least once on the show before. Where are we at today in late February with an ETA for McGonigal?
Well, I think the ETA is 2026. Now, when in 2026, I don't know. It could be opening day. It could be September. And I think that's the conundrum a lot of teams face in the age of the prospect promotion incentive, where if you're not going to put a guy on that opening day roster, you might just be best served holding on to him, retaining his rookie eligibility. Now, that gets even more complicated when you have a team that is trying to win a World Series, which I think the Tigers are. If they determine, look, McGonigal, this guy's really good and he's really advanced. He has not played in AAA yet. He's played, I think, 46 games above high A. So a little more experience than Connor Griffin in Pittsburgh, but not a lot more experience than Connor Griffin. That makes me think he's probably going to start the season in Toledo. Now, I don't know that. If he continues to have a good spring, that conversation could shift really quickly. But I think the safe bet is he starts in Toledo. But then let's say the Tigers' offense is sputtering and McGonigal's tearing it up. Do you call him up in May or June? I don't know. From like the asset management perspective, which I think the Tigers value, that's maybe not the move. But from the trying to win in 2026, that's probably the move. So I think it's a fascinating discussion. I'm not sure what the answer is going to be, but even just watching McGonigal this spring, you know, the bat-to-ball skills are real. The hands are lightning fast. The makeup is there. He's not a great shortstop, but I think he looks better just on the eye than he did even this time a year ago. I think he can play there for a little bit, and that's probably the plan, is for him to stick at shortstop for a while longer. So that's all I'll say. I'll be fascinated when he debuts.
Yeah, I hope it's early, but you're right. A lot of possibilities here. It does feel like there's a lot of pressure on this team with it being Tarek Skubal's final season before reaching free agency to push as many chips in as possible. Defensively, there's some question as to how the pieces actually fit together on this roster. I mean, do you buy Colt Keith as a regular at third? You like the glove over there? And the other way to think about it, too, is like there's the pre-McGonigal world and the post Kevin McConaughey world where you have to shuffle around based on that. Like, I could see, I don't know, Torkelson DHing and Kerry Carpenter having to play the outfield and everything kind of shifting around in different ways depending on who is up and when they're up.
Yeah, I think the good thing is the Tigers are built with the flexibility and shifting around in mind. So many guys play multiple positions. But you're right in that the defense, particularly the infield defense, is not good. I look at it as the Tigers and their models must indicate that they don't care that much about infield defense. Spencer Torkelson, he was better last year at first, but he's average at best. Gleyber Torres is probably one of the worst defensive second baseman in the league. At shortstop, we don't even know who's going to get the bulk of playing time at shortstop. Javi Baez, great on the eye, hasn't graded out as well in the last couple of years. Zach McKinstry actually graded out really well there last year. I think he's +4 defensive runs saved, something like that. But it was a smaller sample. Like, is he going to actually play shortstop more? I'm not sure. And then third base, you're right. Colt Keith probably projects to get the bulk of the playing time there with some McKinstry, with some maybe Matt Vierling and others sprinkled in. And Keith is not the most fleet of foot. Now, he's worked really hard. A couple of years ago, he played second base and looked a lot better at the end of the year than he did the start of the year. He's put in similar work at third, but even the arm, how well does that play every single day at third base? I think it's reasonable to expect he'll probably be a negative defender. The question is, can he be -4 or 5 and you can live with him, or is it worse and it creates a real problem? And it's interesting, too, the Tigers have a lot of ground ball pitchers on their staff. They just signed the preeminent ground ball pitcher in Framber Valdez. So they actually have some pretty good outfield defense, especially if Parker Meadows can hit in center, if Riley Green can play better than he did out there a year ago, Matt Vierling, Winsel Perez can hold their own. But on the infield, yeah, this is not an infield defense built to scoop up ground balls. And even with McGonigal, who you're probably stretching a little bit at shortstop, and some of the other guys, Max Anderson on the way, I'm not sure it projects to get a ton better in the future, at least the short-term future. So that I do think that's somewhat of a cause for concern with the Tigers as well.
Yeah, it's weird with the Framber edition in particular, right? I mean, a guy that ran 58.6% ground ball rate last year has a 61.8% ground ball rate for his career. I mean, the best power ground ball option in the league, at least on the open market this year, but generally in the league, and they bring him in with this infield defense. So very curious to see how that works out. Just tying this position player group together real quick. Last year, the top 5. We have a rule of 5 on the show because we're trying to figure out who's actually there every day or near every day. You can't platoon everywhere. It was Torres, Green, Torkelson, Keith, and Kerry Carpenter rounding out their 5. Like, the first 3 were all over 600 plate appearances. It's kind of easy to say, sure, yeah, put those guys in the 5 again. Do you see Keith and Carpenter coming in with similar amounts of playing time again this year, or do you see someone else pushing ahead? I mean, like, Meadows was close, and his defense in center field could be valued in a way where maybe it's him, but like, who else could pop from a playing time perspective?
Yeah, that's certainly a good question. I would maybe keep an eye on Matt Vierling, who was hurt all of last year. Because he was hurt all of last year, it's a little bit of a question. Even where he's going to play is a question. Could be a lot of right, could be a lot of center, could be third, could even be some first mixed in. But just 2 years ago, Vierling was a really productive player. I think almost a 4-win player on Baseball Reference. I think the Tigers would like a productive version of Matt Vierling, and if he can click, he's a name I would certainly circle. Meadows as well. Like, his bat is just such a question mark. He's had some high highs and some low lows in his time in the major leagues. He was also hurt a lot last year. So the good version of Meadows, man, is a guy you want out there as much as possible, but the bad version of Meadows might not even make it through the year if he's not hitting enough to stick in the big leagues. So yeah, a real question, I think, with those 2 guys in particular who kind of had broken, injury-riddled seasons last year.
Yeah, it feels like it's a pivotal year for Meadows to show that he's a part of this core going forward, especially with Max Clark looming in the organization and making his move closer and closer to Detroit. Let's shift the focus over to the pitchers, though. They added Framber, as we mentioned earlier, got him on pretty favorable terms, like a high AAV, but not a lot of years. So ultimately, I think that works out great. And you've got an excellent 1-2 combo with Skubal. You think about this team from a playoff perspective, like, those 2 guys could basically take a series for you if they're healthy and pitching at the higher end of what we've seen from them throughout their careers. The rest of the rotation, is really interesting because they brought back Justin Verlander. Huge win for anybody that had a Tigers Verlander jersey in the closet, but that was a good jersey even if he never came back. How do you see Verlander fitting in the back end? And obviously Jack Flaherty's still there. Casey Mize showed some growth last year, but what do you think they're really expecting from Verlander in his age 43 season?
Yeah, I think the good news is, even though he is such a big name, he is not being counted on to carry this staff. We'll see how they actually line up, but in my mind, he's basically their number 5 starter. And Verlander showed some encouraging signs at the end of last year. It was a tough season for him, and he battled some injuries, but his last 13 starts, he had a sub-3 ERA. He did some good things, so there's something still left in the tank. I think Verlander himself thinks if he can be healthy, he can still pitch like that throughout a full season. We will see, but I think he's really just counted on to be serviceable more than he is elite at this point in his career, at this point in the Tigers' trajectory. So I kind of think that's a good thing. Like, you have 2 aces in Skubal and Fromber. You have some pretty good mid-rotation starters in Flaherty and Casey Mize. If you get the good version of Verlander, great. And if you don't, it's probably okay. Even if, I think you just hope he's not terrible, because that would get awkward real quick. And a pitcher of his age, you never know when you might just fall off the cliff. But Verlander's one of those guys who's been a little bit superhuman throughout his career. He was able to have success even at the tail end of last year. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up being all right for him.
And Casey Mize, I think, is really interesting. So we did see the K rate jump last year, 22.2%, easily the best he's posted as a big leaguer. He's shown himself to be a guy that has really good control, does not hurt himself with free passes. Saw a little uptick in homers last year, but all in all, I think this was the best really full season version we've seen of Mize since at least 2021, and maybe ever if the swing and miss from last season kind of jumps off the page to you as much as it does to me. Do you think there's one more level coming from Mize, or do you think this is sort of the reasonable plateau that we should expect from him on a typical year-to-year basis?
Yeah, there's kind of been a joke on my podcast throughout the years, kind of say, I can't quit Casey Mize, and I think that applies. I think the good thing is last year he established like a level, like a baseline. Like, this is probably who he can be for a long time. But is there a higher level in there? I still have reason to believe there could be. And if you just go through his game logs, I mean, he had some really good starts last year. And I think there's still a difference between the really good Mize and the okay Mize. The really good Mize, it's when he has the splitter going. The splitter, his signature pitch, the thing that got him drafted number 1, and hasn't been all that much of a weapon, certainly not a consistent weapon in the major leagues. But he got a little more action, threw it a little harder last year, got his arm angle back up. And there were nights when he had that thing going. To me, it changed his entire arsenal, because if he can spot the fastball, use a couple different versions of his slider, but have that splitter as a real put-away pitch, he made the All-Star game. He was overperforming his metrics throughout much of that first half. And then, the ceiling kind of caved in for him a little bit in the second half. But there is a really good version of Mize. He's continuing to kind of hone these sliders. Just talking to Casey this spring, I think he feels encouraged because he felt like he was, even nights where he didn't finish with a great line score, he felt like he was close, like a pitch or two away, like a ball that got down the line, that a couple inches either way, his outing is much different. Where he said in years past, I just wasn't that close. So it's certainly an interesting year with Mize, who was a little bit up and down last year, but there's still signs of a pretty good pitcher in there.
Yeah, and if what we saw last year is the floor, like where he's going in drafts, he ends up being fine value-wise. But to know there's that possibility that he's tweaking, adjusting, still looking for one more thing that will push him that up a little bit, like that gives me that hope that I'm on that side that doesn't want to give up on him just yet. I think it's in part because if the split was just dialed in for a full season, it's such a great pitch for him, and it's not like it's a 2-pitch mix either. He's got a deep enough mix where he can keep hitters off balance. He's got at least 3 pitches I think he trusts now against lefties and righties. And I think that's kind of a key to be able to maybe get to that lineup a third time and to like offer up something closer to true like ace level performances. Fortunately for the Tigers with Skubal and Fromber, you don't need Mize to hit that level, right? If he's a good 3, that goes a very, very long way for them as well. Bullpen edition, the big one, of course, Kenley Jansen, looking to get to 500 saves. I think we've seen pitching chaos in Detroit for a few years now. Do we at least have some regular season stability with Kenley Jansen being the ninth inning guy, or do you think AJ Hinch is still going to play some games?
From a fantasy perspective, I would not bank on any of these guys getting you a bundle of saves. I do think Kenley might get the first shake at being the ninth inning guy, but this is still the Tigers. This is still AJ Hinch. We'll see some Will Vest. We'll see some Kyle Finnegan in the ninth inning. There's a real chance Jansen can finish with 20-plus saves, but let's say I don't think anyone's getting 40 saves the way AJ manages his bullpen. And Jansen's a fascinating signing to me. Surface stuff last year, really good. Underlying stuff, pretty concerning last season. So I don't know exactly what to make. I was a little surprised the Tigers added a pitcher of his age with some concerning, exit velocities, some other metrics against him last year, and a guy who had been used to being a set closer his whole career. Now, again, it seems like Jansen's on board, and I wouldn't be shocked if he gets, at least early in the season, the lion's share of ninth inning opportunities. But I think it's worth wondering, how much of a sure thing is his performance for a guy who's in his upper 30s. I don't know, especially when you have a guy like Will Vest, who is really good, who throws vert fastball. I wouldn't be shocked if Will Vest ends up getting more save opportunities by the end of the year, just because I think he might be a better pitcher at this stage in his career.
Yeah, I feel like the closer role is kind of funny. I mean, I wouldn't even look at every save opportunity and say they're all the same.
Right.
Up 3 versus up 1, middle of the lineup versus bottom of the lineup. And you might be thinking about things like that if you're in AJ Hinch's shoes. And you could get enough of those slightly less risky save opportunities for Jansen to get 24 and get to 500, but I have a hard time penciling him in for a repeat of last year, in part because the K rate was as low as it's ever been at 24%. We saw him get kind of lucky on balls in play. 195 BABIP, career 261, 85.2% left on base percentage. That was the first time he was above 80% since 2018. So a lot of things went right for him last year. And I just think the fact that he finished the year with the Angels, that some other team didn't come in and get him at the trade deadline last year, also speaks to the way the league kind of saw that performance as it was unfolding a year ago.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The Tigers could have used a closer at the trade deadline. They didn't go get him then.
Yeah, and they did go get him for depth purposes. So I think you're right to call out Vest still as probably the best all-round reliever they have, and a guy that will at least get some saves. If you're in a league that uses holds, he'll pile up tons of those as well. So do not forget about Will Vest just because Kenley Jansen is in tow. I wanted to ask you about this win total projection, 83.7 from Pacoda, second in the division behind the Royals, not by a lot, but a surprising number for me, given the quality that we saw from this team for most of last season. Do you think that's too hot, too cold, or just right for these Tigers as they're built?
It feels a little low after the addition of Valdez in particular. I think that is enough to bump them to 85, 86 as their floor. I think the Tigers tend to always believe they can exceed these projection systems just through kind of the context of the game, how they match up, how they pinch hit, all that stuff. I think they believe that can buy them an extra few wins each year, and it has for the past couple of years at least. Now, I do think the thing is, I don't look at this team and be like, 90 wins for sure. I think there is enough, too many question marks offensively, and then you're always banking on health with your pitching staff. I think it helps that they play in a weak division. I'm surprised that projection systems aren't spitting them out as a pretty clear division favorite. So I think they're somewhere between kind of 83 and 90. I think 86 wins is probably where I would peg them just in my mind.
Yeah, and the injuries so far haven't been too bad. Troy Melton, that elbow strain, is one we're watching pretty closely because it
doesn't sound
kind of felt like he was the next guy up. He'd have some kind of role, and he'd log a lot of innings for this team over the course of the year. And now I think they have to be really careful with him to make sure that injury doesn't turn into something worse. Any sleepers, anybody on the pitching side that you think could emerge with some injuries opening up the door at some point in the season? I mean, I know they brought in Drew Anderson. They brought him back from the KBO, but Anderson or anybody else kind of catching your eye, someone that could emerge?
I don't know. Anderson's going to be pretty interesting to follow. That's, They gave him $7 million out of the KBO. They really wanted him. They wanted him to come into camp as a starter. Then they add Valdez and Verlander, so now it's probably like, okay, you're going to the pin, maybe kind of a swingman role. I don't know that I was overly high on him, but just watching him, it's really early in spring, but just watching him, he's been pretty impressive. The kick change he added in Korea, I mean, Tarek Skubal told me he was one of the nastiest pitches he's ever seen. So if Skubal's saying that, I'll believe it. He's off to a nice start. What's his role going to be exactly? I don't know, but worth keeping an eye on. There's some upside. There's also some downside. And probably Cater Montero as well, a guy who Tigers have used as a starter, but pitched out of the pen in the playoffs and was really good, especially with Melton potentially on the shelf. I wouldn't be surprised if Montero remains stretched out as a starter and maybe starts the year in AAA, but a guy who, again, is going to factor in, whether it's stepping into the rotation. I would especially keep an eye on him if he goes to the bullpen where his stuff can play up, where the velo can tick up a little bit. Montero is one of those guys, a little underrated, has kind of done still some refining, missed more bats in the zone. Can you throw strikes consistently? But I think there's some upside, especially if he gets a bullpen look at any point.
Yeah. A lot of ways I think Cater Montero could actually be pretty valuable to the Tigers over the course of 2026. That Anderson call, I think, is a good one just because mentioned Verlander's age. Jack Flaherty's got a rich injury history. Mize has had trouble staying healthy himself. There's going to be points where they need to go 6-7 deep and bring some guys in. And Anderson put up just ridiculous numbers in the KBO too. Like just even if you're adjusting a lot for the KBO with the translations to the majors, like. Yeah, sure, he struck out 35% of the batters he faced last year in the KBO. Knock it down to 25%. A 25% K rate from a starter would actually be really good. So I'm curious to see what he brings to the table when he gets an opportunity. Obviously going to be on the big league roster, doesn't have options left, $7 million. You're going to get an opportunity. It's just a question of what the shape of that opportunity looks like for Anderson. Cody, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Always appreciate your insight. We'll look forward to catching up with you again later on this season.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Derek.
One more team preview to get to today. We have the Minnesota Twins closing things out for us today. And to break down this puzzle, we've brought in Aaron Gleeman, one of the Twins beat writers here at The Athletic. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me.
I like that description. It feels to me like a box of puzzle pieces, and you're sure some are missing, and you have some duplicates, and you have to still try to build this into an actual puzzle.
Yes, I don't like trying to explain what's happening with the Twins right now because I'm a basic logic kind of person. Things have a natural order. Things should go together and be cohesive. And there's a reason that we'll get to in just a minute that kind of explains why this is so chaotic. But the Twins, many of our listeners know, they sold off at the trade deadline last year. They haven't been very aggressive doing anything so far this offseason. It's been an underwhelming sort of offseason. And instead of continuing down the path of being sellers and playing more for the future, it's sort of like they just slammed the brakes on that plan. Changes in the front office, some tweaks to who is running things within the ownership group. Can you break that down for us? Like, why did things change so abruptly for the Twins over the course of this offseason?
So like you said, they sell off at the deadline. At that point, Derek Falvey was running the front office, and Joe Polad, who's a third-generation Polad, was running things from the business or from the ownership side. Mid-December rolls around, and they basically push out Joe Polad, and he's replaced by his older brother, Tom Polad, who has not really been involved in baseball at all. I mean, they're all fans, but he's been running, several of their other huge businesses, and it felt pretty much like things were going so poorly, not only on the field with the Twins, but off the field. They claim to have racked up almost $500 million in debt, that they kind of pulled him from the business world and said, this needs to be your priority. You have to kind of fix this. And the problem is, A, they had already traded Correa and basically the entire bullpen at the trade deadline. And their payroll was a shade under $100 million, but they also had the debt. They brought in new minority owners. And Tom Polad, who's now running things, talked a pretty big game about, well, I want to be aggressive. I'm willing to spend. And now we're, a month out from opening day, and their payroll is 105. And like you said, I would argue that probably their biggest offseason acquisition was, Josh Bell. And, he's okay. He's fine. He's an average-ish, first base DH bat or whatever. But it's hard to look at the payroll and it's hard to look at what they have and really haven't done this offseason and the past 2 seasons really ending poorly and have a lot of confidence that this will be different. And then to your point, it's like, well, if Tom Pollett is now saying the expectation is that they're going to win, and in fact now Falvey is gone, he has been pushed out, and Jeremy Zoll has been elevated to the top front office role, that would seemingly require a lot more help brought in. And so, yeah, it is a very weird puzzle to put together of like 6 months ago you sold, you got a new owner, you got a new front office boss. Rocco Baldelli has been replaced as manager with Derek Shelton, although even he is kind of a retread, formerly with the Twins and with the Pirates for quite a while. And so it feels like a lot of talk about this being a winning season, but not a lot of actions that would make me more than skeptical that they can do that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's kind of carried over for me, for the last couple of Twins previews we've done, we've seen a position player group that lacks high volume players. And that's because of Correa's injury history, Byron Buxton's injury history. So systems aren't going to spit out 650 plate appearances for those guys, but you'd look at the team and say they're everyday players when they're not on the IL. We do this thing called the rule of 5 because the way a major league team is built, 13 position players, you can mix and match at 4 spots, but you kind of need 5 guys that are out there every day. Generally, you can mess around with that. You can play more than 5 guys every day if your team's really good, but I don't think that's the situation we're looking at in Minnesota right now. So my question for you is, who do we circle as the key core 5 guys right now? I mean, I think Buxton still obviously fits in there. He's one of the holdovers. Royce Lewis kind of fits that same sort of Buxton Correa description I threw out before, where when he's not hurt, you'd like him to be an everyday guy. But how do you see that 5 coming together right now? I mean, is Josh Bell actually part of that? Like, even though he doesn't move the projection much, he's just one of those guys that comes in, hits 20 homers, and is worth about a win or a win and a half above replacement while doing so. Is he actually a regular on this team all season long?
I do think the fact that he's been healthy, which a lot of their guys, like you mentioned, haven't. He's a switch hitter. He's just sort of a plug-and-play guy. Like, I don't have huge expectations, but like you said, he can pop 20 homers. I'm sure he'll hit 4th or 5th in this lineup. Plenty of RBI opportunities. I do think he's going to play every day. That might not look great defensively, but he'll play every day. You know, like you said, Buxton. The problem with the Twins is twofold. One, the injuries, but they also tend to have a lot of left-handed corner guys, and they pretty strictly platoon them. And so even when those guys perform well, I'm thinking of like a Matt Wallner, Trevor Larnach type, they're never going to get 600 plate appearances. They're in a role that is kind of designed to be, 450, 500, and that's great for rate stats. And if you can mix and match in a league or whatever, that's great. But yeah, in terms of everyday players, I would point to Jeffers relative to catcher. So the past 3 years, he has essentially alternated starts with Christian Vasquez, and that was part of their plan. Jeffers way outperformed him, especially in fantasy terms, obviously. Vasquez is gone. They signed Victor Caratini, who's a pretty good backup, but I think he's going to also play quite a bit of first base DH. So talking to Jeffers a few days ago, he's definitely training and preparing mentally to play, 105, 110 games as opposed to maybe 80 or 85 the past few years. I do think, he's got some power. Batting average might not be great, but I would put him, at least relative to the catcher spot, as one of those everyday guys. I think Josh Bell's going to play every day. Luke Keeschel is going to play every day and could be kind of a sneaky. People saw glimpses of it, but because he only played like 30 or 40 games, maybe some of the rankings and stuff are not going to be high because he's going to – I don't know that the power is going to be there, but I would expect him good batting average. I think he's going to run a lot, and I think he's going to bat near or at the top of the lineup. Royce Lewis, like you said, when healthy, he's going to play every day, but you need to pencil in probably, 110 games instead of 160 for him. And, maybe Brooks Lee, although I have questions about him offensively and defensively at this point. And then the other guys, you get to all the kind of platoon, Wallner, Larnach types. I think Alan Roden could be that type of guy for them. But yeah, I would say Jeffers at catcher, Bell, Keeschel, Lewis, Buxton when healthy is probably the group we're looking at.
Yeah, and then maybe it changes a little bit depending on when some of the other prospects emerge too. So they have some flexibility there. And the guy that you mentioned that I think is really interesting is Keeschel, because the write-up I remember from Keith Law maybe 2 years ago now is that, Keeschel is just a hitter. Doesn't matter where he plays. Like, you see that sometimes from prospect analysts where they're like, he hits. Doesn't matter where he plays. The makeup of the production is a little strange because for a guy that does hit and hit the ball like, often, low K rate, 14% last year, it's maybe 12 to 15 homer pop right now with the possibility for more later, but he's running a lot more than expected. And we saw the Twins as a team get really aggressive late in the year. It was almost like they said, nothing's working, let's shake it up. Like the stolen bases from Royce Lewis, given all the leg injuries he had, that was a pleasant surprise at the end of the year for a lot of people. But is Keishel like a 35 to 40 steal guy that hits for a high average, runs a high OBP, and then just gets to that low double-digit power? Because if that's what he is as a fantasy perspective, that ends up being a much better player than I think the fantasy community expected when he was first emerging in this organization.
I mean, I think in terms of hitting, what you described is kind of how I view him, which like he is strong and he is capable of pulling for power, but he mostly just shoots the balls to the gaps. I would expect his on base to be more impressive than his pure batting average. I don't think he'll be a low batting average, but I think his on base will be much, among the league leaders because he has such a good eye. He makes good contact. The speed thing was interesting. What you described is also what I think happened, which is they were so bad, they traded away all these guys, and they kind of, after being a station-to-station team under Baldelli for years, just said, you know what, screw it, let's run. And Keishel benefited from that. I think Austin Martin benefited from that quite a bit, although he's maybe more of a role guy. Now, under a new manager, I do have some questions because Keishel is fast, but I don't know that he's like a 90th percentile speed type of guy. He's constantly going to be standing on first base. He's going to be aggressive, but I do wonder if they're going to have the same constant green light mindset that they have down the stretch last year. So maybe, 25, 30 steals I think are doable. I wouldn't extrapolate from what we saw in August and September and say, oh, can he get 40, 50 steals? I mean, maybe. But yeah, like you said, if he's getting on base and he's running, even if it's only 10 homers, that might be less valuable like from a real world perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, I definitely see him, if healthy, minimum 20 steals, I think should be pretty easy. He's got the second base eligibility. He might end up playing some outfield, maybe some left field in time, but yeah, and he's going to be at the top of the lineup. It's not the greatest lineup in terms of run production, but I think steals and runs scored for sure. He should be pretty good.
I know you mentioned the corner outfielders in particular with Matt Wallner and Trevor Larnach. They generally like to platoon both of those guys. Is there a world in which one of them breaks out of it? Like, do you see one as being more likely to have a shot at everyday opportunities? I've been looking at Wallner as the more intriguing of the two, but they're very similar players in terms of what they bring to the table.
They're so similar. Both are bad defensively. They're huge. They look like they should have massive power. I do think Wallner has come closer than Larnach to like tapping into the full upside offensively. Larnach has really kind of settled in as just a mediocre platoon bat. Wallner had a disappointing year last year. He still popped like 24 homers or something like that. I do think there's more of a chance that even in a platoon role, Wallner at least has decent value. I actually was kind of surprised they kept Larnach, for $4.5 million. They do have Rodin. They do have some prospects who are also left-handed corner bat possibilities. So I was surprised they kept him. I guess if choosing between the two as a minimal investment and a draft type thing, for sure Wallner. I think there's the ability to hit 30 homers there at least, but you're going to have to live with a pretty bad batting average for both of them.
Yeah, that's sort of just built into that profile. But the quality of contact that Wallner makes does make him kind of intriguing as one of those late thumpers you can get. If he finds his way out of the big side of platoon, then the playing time breaks through, maybe even to the point where he becomes a shallow league guy at some point. It has been a strange journey, I think, for this group of prospects. I would say Emmanuel Rodriguez has one of the more wildly ranging sets of opinions I've seen on any prospect maybe ever. I feel like I've been doing this for about 20 years now, and there are people that think he's great, that he's going to be an above average regular. There are some people that say it's not going to work at all. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on Rodriguez and what his timeline might be, given the push from ownership maybe to be more competitive. Like, if they're not going to spend money and they're not going to trade young players, they're probably going to start playing young players if they want to get better.
Yeah, so he played all of last year at AAA at like 22 or 23, but he was hurt for about 2/3 of the year. If he was healthy, I think he probably would have seen some time in the majors in September. I think the plan will be send him back to AAA. He's had a ton of injuries, but if he can stay healthy, you put in 6-8 weeks there. revisit the situation. Injuries open it up. I do think by the second half he will be a regular for the Twins. But like you said, his skill set is just so odd. Like it's so extreme. He almost has like the Adam Dunn or Jim Thome hitting approach, which is he just refuses to swing at non-strikes. He gets in 2-2, 3-2 counts constantly, but he has so much swing and miss that when he does swing, one swing is a strikeout. So I think he's averaged like 130 walks per 150 games in the minors, but he's also struck out so much he's like a career 250 hitter in the minors. So I do have big questions about, extreme patience blurring into like passivity maybe a little bit. In the majors, that's tough because they can throw you strikes on the corners. But meanwhile, that type of skill set is common with slow, DH first base left field. He's a 5'10", 20 steal speed, maybe be able to play some center if they didn't have Buxton. Like I think he could be a Gold Glove corner guy. It's just such a rarity to find. It's like you took Adam Dunn and turned him into a fast 5'10" center fielder. And like you said, I just don't know what to make of that. I do think realistically he's going to be underrated probably in real life because I think he might hit like 230. And so that's going to lead to some situations where his value is questionable in fantasy too. But I mean, if you're in a league that's OBP based, he's going to draw a ton of walks. The strikeouts, the batting average is going to be bad. I do think I saw him hit a couple homers live earlier this week. Like he does have 25, 30 homer power, and they're trying to work with him to like ambush more early count pitches so that he's not constantly in 2-strike counts. So he's very intriguing. The skill set is extreme on both ends. I don't know that I would necessarily think he's going to get 100 games in the majors this year, but I would expect in the second half him playing every day.
The consensus on Walker Jenkins is a little bit clearer. Like I think there's generally a lot of faith that he is a regular, possibly a high-impact regular. What do you see with Jenkins, and how quickly do you think he could emerge as part of this possible core five for the Twins?
Yeah, I mean, I think the timeline could be similar. He's going to start the year almost certainly at AAA in the same outfield as Rodriguez. I think they've shown a willingness to push him. He's had some injuries slow him too. Nothing serious really. But the question with him I have is like he does have a little bit of like the Joe Mauer vibes of like very controlled hitter, doesn't strike out much, draws his walks, a lot of singles and doubles. The question with him is I think power. Like he looks the part of a power hitter. I mean, he's like 21, but he's 6'4". He's very strong. When he gets into that pull power, the ball explodes off his bat, but he's so disciplined and he's got an inside out swing a lot of the time. So the question, even with some Twins officials I've talked about it, is he like a 15, 20 homer guy or is there 30 homer potential? Because, while I would love to just use the Joe Mauer comp on every Twin I can, the one I worry about on the lower side is like maybe like a Nick Markakis type, where it's like he does everything well. Left-handed bat, gets on base, 15, 20 homers, good defense, steals some bases. But is he like an all-star MVP caliber? Is he making a big fantasy impact? I think for Jenkins, the key to unlocking that is tapping into more consistent power. Because everything else, I would expect a solid batting average, plenty of walks. He has some speed, although I would guess more of like a 10 to 15 steal type of speed in the majors eventually. But yeah, to me, the power is in a little bit of question. Not that he doesn't have power, but can he really kind of tap into 25-plus homers?
Yeah, a really intriguing player, though. A few different ways he could make it work. Yep. And, I mean, he's been efficient as a base stealer, so at least he picks his spots really well, and we'll see how well that translates against big league batteries as he moves up. The pitching has been kind of just unfortunately hampered by a lot of injuries this spring. Most notably, we've talked about Pablo Lopez, torn UCL. His season obviously is over. Joe Ryan's back problem doesn't seem to be too bad, right? It's going to keep him out of the World Baseball Classic, potentially, but you're not worried about opening day necessarily based on what we know right now. How do you see the rotation coming together? I mean, I know Bailey Ober was hurt last year, but he clearly has a spot. Simeon Woods-Richardson, if you either didn't play fantasy last year or didn't watch the Twins in the second half, you might not realize he pitched really well in the second half. There was a little bit of an adjustment that he made, too, that unlocked that. So I'm curious about Woods-Richardson, also curious about guys like Taj Bradley, Zebby Matthews, how you feel about the collection of arms they have trying to round out that group to start this season.
Yeah, I mean, they were touting their depth, and then you lose Lopez right away for the season. David Festa's been shut down already with some shoulder problems. I do think, Ryan and Ober are locked in. Those are the veteran 1-2. They're not going anywhere. Ryan didn't finish great last year. I know the trade deadline stuff maybe distracted him, and then like you described with Ober, I would love to see Ober back. He's a lot of fun to watch, carving people up at 91, 92, but at 89, it was a little trickier last year. So his health, I think, is a big question mark. I do think I would probably view Taj Bradley and Simeon Woods-Richardson as kind of that like preferred young guys class, and then that would leave one spot for either Zebby Matthews or Mick Abel, most likely, who they got from the Phillies in the Duran trade at the deadline to claim. They had initially talked about, well, we got 8 or 9 starters. Somebody can go to the bullpen. Well, I think that's out now. They really now have 6 guys for 5 spots, and you still have a month to go in terms of avoiding injuries. So, everybody knows about Ryan. I'm a little pessimistic about Ober getting a full bounce back because they're using the rest and rehab rather than, he had a lot of hip problems last year. So I'm a little skeptical on him. Woods-Richardson, like you said, was interesting. He added a splitter to the mix in the second half, which gave him a little bit more of a weapon against lefties. It upped the strikeouts from below average to kind of average-ish, which maybe he's got a little more upside than we've given him credit for so far. They really do like Taj Bradley a lot. I know people have probably been drafting him the last 2 or 3 years and disappointed by the results because he was pretty hyped with the Rays, but I would be shocked if a healthy Taj Bradley is not in the opening day rotation. And then Zebby has significant upside too, and honestly, Mick Abel, I haven't seen him as much as these other guys, but he does, he's upper 90s with the fastball. He has 4 or 5 good pitches, including multiple off speeds. The question with him is, can he throw strikes? And also, is he, because he has less experience, is he more likely to be the 6th out of, not getting one of the 5 spots, get sent to AAA, although with the Twins and injuries, he'll be back by April or whatever. So I would say from an upside perspective, probably Bradley and Matthews are a little ahead of Simeon Woods-Richardson. I would probably stay away from Ober unless you're just getting him dirt cheap. And then, Joe Ryan, he's legit. I mean, you look at him and the strikeouts are maybe more than the raw stuff because he's got a little bit of deception, funky delivery and all that. But he doesn't often get talked about as a frontline starter, but I think especially for fantasy, when you're looking at whip is always going to be good, strikeouts are always going to be huge. The question, though, is, if the Twins start slowly, is he a trade candidate? And you can't predict the environment that he's going to end up in for the second half.
Yeah, that's the key is like over the course of the season, maybe he ends up in a more hitter-friendly environment or a more challenging division, just where the teams he sees regularly are a little tougher than what he's got in the current version of the AL Central. So that's sort of lingering in the background. But I've landed on Joe Ryan as being a little bit underrated in most circles. Last thing I wanted to ask you about roster-wise is the bullpen. They bring back Taylor Rogers. Anthony Bonda's part of the mix now. I think they got Andrew Chafin there as an NRI. The question, as you probably know, is about saves and who, if anyone, is going to reliably provide saves because they're all cheap. Like, they're all late flyers right now. I think most people are just saying, well, Rogers has done it before, so he's getting the first crack. Is that an assessment you believe in, or is there someone else that you actually like to be the capital C closer? Maybe not when the season begins, but by the time the season ends out of their current group.
It's a real weird hodgepodge of guys, like you mentioned. Liam Hendricks is also a rehab project for them, who has a ton of closing experience, obviously. I kept waiting all offseason. They kept adding lefties, Andrew Chafin, Taylor Rogers, Bonda, etc. And I kept waiting for them to bring in a Kenley Jansen type, just righty who could just take over the ninth, and they just never did that, which I don't know that they're going to have that many save chances, first of all. Second of all, I do think there is a decent opportunity for Rogers, at least at the beginning of the season, to just be handed that role, in part because he's done it before, in part because if they have 3 or 4 lefties in the bullpen, there is a way to kind of ease that logjam by making, as weird as this sounds, by making one of them the closer, because then you're not looking to match them up against lefties. I do think if Hendricks is healthy, he could absolutely be back in the closer mix, but he hasn't even pitched in a game yet. When I left camp a couple days ago, he was still working on the side. Velocity's been okay, but I mean, as a late flyer, either of those guys would work. Cole Sands probably just on like merit as a non-elderly option, I guess. 2 years ago, he pitched like a guy on the rise who could maybe be a primary setup man. Last year, he took a step backward, but I do think if I'm trying to find an under 30 guy who might end up with 15 saves or something for them, he's probably the best bet. Bonda may be in the mix. I mean, the reality is they're not going to have a ton of saves to go around, and I think from a fantasy perspective, there's a decent chance that it becomes one of those headache teams where they're just constantly mixing and matching, and a bunch of guys have 7 saves each. I think if they end up in a spot where like Festa can come back and they have an extra starter, I could see maybe in the second half, someone like Zebby Matthews, they just let him air it out for an inning at a time. He's going to be 99 or 100. There's some intrigue there. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would probably say this is probably a stay away bullpen, at least initially. But I would say don't underestimate the chance of Rogers getting the early save chances.
Yeah, sometimes a partial season is all you need. That third closer ends up being the difference maker in a roto league. You get someone for a little while, they get traded, they lose the job. Well, those extra 10 saves moved you up 4 or 5 spots in the standings, and you cashed. You won your league because of it. So I think that's probably a good way to think about Rogers. Definitely more of a deeper league sort of guy. But not a lot of great draft and hold darts in this bullpen, which is in the past, like you'd see 3 or 4 Twins relievers get drafted in a 50-round draft because if the closer broke, the next couple guys up were all interesting enough to get you Ks, get you good ratios, and that's not really true of most of this group. When they had 9 starters, you could say, hey, if Taj doesn't work as a starter, Taj Bradley would be a heck of a closer. They don't have that luxury right now. The PECOTA win total projection here, Aaron, 78.6. I like PECOTA a lot. I respect math and projections and the hard work of the people that generate them. Having a hard time telling myself that this is anything but too hot based on some of the misfortunes of this team and their teardown that started up last summer.
I agree. Yeah, I love Baseball Prospectus. I worked there for a few years. PECOTA's great. I would say in general, my perception is that PECOTA has tended to be a little higher on the Twins than like the public perception most years. And so this maybe fits that. In my mind, before the projections started coming out a few weeks ago, I thought this feels like a 75 win team to me. And that was before losing Pablo Lopez. Now, I do think some of the prospects we talked about, if they get called up and make an impact right away, there is the possibility that they're better than just the team we're looking at on paper. But you also have to think about a repeat of last season, which is they entered July or got through July maybe 5 games below 500 or right around 500 and tore it down, and they were the worst team in the American League. You end up with 92 losses. I think there's a very realistic possibility we see something like that again. You know, if you enter the trade deadline and you're 5 below 500 – and you trade Joe Ryan and you trade Ryan Jeffers and guys like that, and obviously Lopez is already injured, I think the second half over-under could be pretty low in that regard, so maybe it kind of equals out. But yeah, I would lean towards the under. Not that 78 is such an impressive total or anything, but it feels to me like 78 to 80 wins is if good things happen. Not best case scenario, but if good things happen. And if bad things happen, which we've already seen losing Lopez, I absolutely think this could be a low 70 to mid 70 win team.
Yeah, it's a bummer. And I've been duped by this core a few times in the past, so it would only make sense for me to sour on them and to have them pleasantly surprise everybody. And I know that's just how this predictions game often works. We've been giving some off-season grades to every team. I threw an F on the Twins. I don't think I gave anyone an F just because of the chaos, man. Like, what do you, like, Derek Falvey, I think, is a good front office executive. I think you want a guy like that running things. Like I don't know. I found that whole sequence to be puzzling, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, they parted on mutual terms, Derek Falvey. I think he got sick of the increased degree of difficulty with the payroll being cut year after year, and now the new owners coming in and said, "Oh, I expect him to win," and it's like, well, 6 months ago we traded everybody away. I have no doubt he's going to get at minimum a number 2 job in some front office next year. And I think there's a decent chance he's the number 1 guy after the next cycle. It has been a very strange offseason on and off the field. I do agree with you that they've had such an underwhelming – I've been covering the Twins for 20-something years. I never have high expectations for free agency or spending. And even this fell so far below that, I mean, maybe you can squint and give them a D, but I do think an F is not unfair when They are at a $105 million payroll. They were 140 last year, 165 3 years ago. You got an owner who's saying we expect to win. As we just went through all the roster, I mean, there was plenty of opportunities that they could have added even kind of mid-level free agents and boosted this in the bullpen or the lineup. So, yeah, I mean, it's been underwhelming. They need the young guys, kind of the Royce Lewis types, Brooks Lee types, the prime age kind of post-hype prospect guys to actually live up to that potential. And then they need that next wave with Jenkins, Rodriguez, Kalen Culpepper, et cetera, to join them. And I think that's a lot of ifs that have to come together. If that happens, I think they could be maybe on the outside fringes of the AL Central because it's always such a weak division. But yeah, it's hard to look at what has happened this offseason and not be confused, not think it was a lot of chaos, and not ultimately, like you said, come away think this was one of the worst graded off seasons of any team.
Yeah. Nowhere to go but up from here, though, right? You need some optimism.
There's a good way to look at it, yes.
Yeah, you probably hit rock bottom this offseason with the way things were handled. So we'll see what the next few months bring in Minnesota. I'm hoping for good things. I want to see happy Twins fans. That would actually be good, right? Friendly neighbors of mine.
I'll come back on. I'll be from the World Series parade. We can do a live broadcast from there when that happens.
I mean, optimism's good, but that's it's a level too far, I think, for me. Aaron, I appreciate you joining me today. I appreciate the time and the insight. We'll look forward to catching up with you again later on this season.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on.
That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. Thanks again to Aaron Gleeman, Jen McCaffrey, and Cody Stavenhagen for bringing their insight to the show. We are back with you on Monday.